Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn. My name is Kristen Hewitt. I'm a television reporter here in South Florida, and today we're going to be talking to Dr. David Ruby. He is the Medical Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital, and throughout this pandemic, we've seen the effects of isolation and loneliness on children. We've seen more anxiety, more depression, more mood disorders, more now than ever. And Dr. Ruby is going to be here to talk about that mental health crisis he's seeing in children and to answer all of your questions. So I'm going to bring him in now. Here he is. Hi, Dr. Ruby. How are you?
Hi, Kristen. How are you? Thanks for having lunch together.
I was going to say, what are we having for
lunch? Listen, I have to admit that I'm going to give a shout out to Mrs. Ruby for all the homemade lunches I now get working from home.
Oh, lucky you. I need a Mrs. Ruby over at my house. Dr. Ruby, before we get started, I just wanted to tell everybody that's watching, if you know anyone that's a parent and is seeing behavior changes in your child, please tag them. Please share this broadcast because it's not every day that you get to talk to the head of a psychiatry program at such an esteemed children's hospital. And there's so much for us all to learn today. So please share this. Please ask questions in the comments and we'll try to get to them. All right, Dr. Ruby, let's get started. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you're seeing. What have you seen? This pandemic started 9-10 months ago. Things are changing in kids' lives. What is it that you're seeing at the hospital?
Okay, so at Joe DiMaggio, we have a variety of different mental health services that we offer. We're definitely in a growing phase. We have emergency services, we've got outpatient services and inpatient services, as well as children who present to the medical units for a variety of medical conditions who express mental health concerns. What is striking now more than ever is the social isolation and social deprivation. Definitely overall in society, as we have grown more technologically savvy prior to the pandemic, there was definitely concerns that kids are spending more time alone, more time playing video games, rather than socializing outdoors, roaming around the neighborhoods for good reasons, as well as getting together after school or in the evenings for various sporting events, etc. Now, unfortunately, all these things have been cut off. It's been going on now since, again, March. We're closing in on a year that this pandemic has started, and we've all have adjusted, but just like any other adjustment in life, everything has positive as well as negative consequences. The primary negative consequence here is going against our human programming to be social beings. And we have had to retreat and regress into our homes, or even as in our state, schools have opened and places of worship have opened. Still, it's held in a minimal role, trying to be out of the house for as little time as possible and limiting our social connections in person. So the deprivation and the social isolation is definitely taking and making an impact, which aggravates perhaps underlying conditions or brings other mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety. I can go more into that briefly, and to the forefront. There is no doubt that there are children and adolescents and families who are more susceptible for genetic reasons per se towards depression and anxiety, or can have new onset mental health issues.
So you talked a little bit about, what causes this, right? Obviously the pandemic is a cause of mental health issues, but what is it that you're seeing? Is it an increase in cases? Are kids more depressed? Are you seeing suicide attempts? I mean, I hate to even bring that up, but what are some of the symptoms and what are you seeing?
Okay. Thanks, Kristen. Depression, we are seeing more depression. We are seeing a busier emergency room. We are seeing kids complaining of being alone and therefore left to their own devices, especially if they have depression prior to the pandemic, or shall we say are at risk for that. We're seeing more suicidal ideation, more sadness, loneliness, But we're also interestingly seeing more social anxiety. So when children and adolescents go outside their homes to school, if they so choose, um, they feel more socially anxious. I will tell you that a great majority of my outpatients have elected to not go back to school and elect to do Zoom school. No doubt that we want people to be physically healthy and not put other adults or more at-risk individuals at medical compromise. But a lot of kids have and families have decided to not go back to regular school, which on one hand keeps everybody a little bit more safe, presumably, but does increase the risk for social isolation and deprivation.
Yeah, I mean, I can say from a personal anecdote, I actually sent my kids back to school because it boosted their moods and mental health. But let's talk about anxiety and depression because, sometimes it's just moodiness, right? We have tweens and teens and they're changing and they're developing and they're growing. So how do you know if it is really anxiety or depression or if it's just a normal teen or tween behavior? Are there certain signs to look out for to know?
That's a great point. I mean, a component of normal development, a component of normal good mental health and normal of being a person is to have moods, to be anxious, to be appropriately anxious at the right time in the right place, especially teenagers, be it hormonal issues, be it changes of life, be it in terms of normal development. Moodiness is part of growing up. The question is when does moodiness turn into depression and when does depression turn into major depressive disorder? And the same thing is true of when does normal life anxiety turn into an anxiety disorder? So the key word for everybody to remember is the word impairment. If what you're experiencing impairs your ability to form relationships, to impairs your ability to function within your household, to impair your ability to function within the school environment and community, be that on Zoom or in person. If there is a change or a decrease in a prior level of functioning, then that can move someone more from, I'll say, normal moodiness, normal anxiety, to questions of a disorder. So if there is social withdrawal, given opportunities to socialize, if the moods are persistent, if the anxiety is experienced more physically than emotionally, such as by headaches, heart beating real fast, palpitations, chills, numbness and tingling in your extremities. It could be changes in school performance or changes in friendships that have taken place. Normally, just to speak on the other side, a young lady told me today how surprisingly she's doing much better in school as her depression has improved. So on the depression side, we have decreased concentration, decreased energy, feelings of hopeless, helpless, and worthlessness, as well as putting people at risk for suicidal ideation.
That's interesting because I didn't realize that some of these mental or mood disorders manifested physically in your body as in tingling or, I didn't realize it was a physicality. I thought it was more behavioral changes. So that's really interesting to learn. I want you to go back though and define it because you're talking about anxiety. You're talking about depression. You mentioned the term social anxiety. I'm not really familiar with that term, social anxiety. Does that mean your kids don't know how to make friends or don't know how to socialize? So if you could just give our audience and the parents watching, kind of just the Cliff Notes version of what is anxiety, what is depression, what does social anxiety mean?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you again for your question here. And please pardon my ways of expressing myself here that hopefully I can make it as clear as possible to our audience. Anxiety is part of life. Anxiety is a developmentally appropriate life experience. Anxiety about, again, in the earliest of times, the goal and the search for food could create severe anxiety. Sadness, we are all programmed for emotions. As a matter of fact, there are psychiatric disorders such as alexithymia, where people don't experience emotions. So we all have them, and they're all built in, and they're all genetic. And actually, interestingly enough, there are studies done of infants, and they're shown faces of various facial expressions, and infants can respond to different facial expressions. So we are programmed from the earliest time in life for social interaction. Social withdrawal is a symptom. So social anxiety happens when I feel nervous, I feel inhibited in a social way, usually surrounded by a number of people. We will ask questions such as, do you feel anxious in private? Do you feel anxious when you're around other people? Do you feel anxious depending on how large it is, especially in unfamiliar areas? Socializing is very challenging. We all do it. We have to do it. Some of us feel more comfortable. Some of us are better at it. Some of us know how to work a room. Some of us prefer taking our cues only when our name is called out at a social gathering. So social anxiety disorder is a disorder where one is inhibited from socializing, and it impacts children and adolescents from the ability to make friends and the ability to connect with other peers in social situations. This may even get in the way of calling a friend or FaceTiming a friend to study together, or to get the latest homework done, or to talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about. And that social avoidance for the purposes of avoiding the social context, that can be one of the symptoms of social anxiety disorder.
Got it. So that's really interesting. And I'd never heard the term social avoidance either, but I'm sure several parents are noticing that their kids want to avoid things socially because of the pandemic and because of the fear of the virus. We have a question. We could probably do another hour Facebook Live on just anxiety, which we're not going to do today, but a question came in I want to show you. It says, how do I help my 8-year-old's anxiety, stomach aches, reading in class almost every day? You mentioned physical symptoms, manifest. I didn't know this. I know you can't dispense medical advice on Facebook, but if a child is experiencing stomach aches in the form of anxiety, what do you normally tell the parents to do?
Okay. So what I think about is, so first of all, I just want to be very clear on the mind-body paradigm. What happens in the mind happens in the body, and what happens in the body happens in the mind. And actually, research is showing that many hormones, neurotransmitters that are in the gut are also found in the brain. And that's why there are things that we call, such as tension headaches, stomach aches, muscle cramps, tension in our muscles. All of this can be related as we feel anxious. And if you sort of think about it, when we think about fight or flight, which again is a normal, healthy expression, because if we're not safe, we want to be able to take off, we will experience an outpouring of adrenaline and being able to feel our bodies tighten up and get ready for flight. So there is no doubt that anxiety and depression can be expressed physically. If there are specific situations that bring out anxiety or bring out stomach aches as compared to one class or another, then this may be a sign that there may be something else going on in that particular specific situation. So, there are specific learning disabilities, math, reading, and anything, and any person or a child in particular who may not feel adequate in their skills, either adequate amongst themselves or adequate amongst their peers, could feel self-conscious and then develop, physical symptoms of anxiety.
That's really interesting. We're getting more questions I want to get to in a second, but I want to go back to anxiety and depression for a second. So we're noticing more kids are having these mood disorders, right? We're noticing kids are feeling lonely if they haven't gone back to school yet, or they're not playing sports, or they're not doing the normal things they've done, or they're saying to their parents, I just want life to go back to normal. So I think a lot of parents can say that they're noticing this in their kids. They're tired, they're sad, they want life to be normal again. So what can parents do? Are there, we're going to talk about when to know when to get help a little bit later on, but what can parents do now if they're at home and they're noticing their kids are they're mentally and physically exhausted of the pandemic?
Okay. So what's healthiest for kids is to have healthy parents. So it is very, very important to make sure that the grown-ups are well. The pandemic has had mixed effects on family relationships. I've had patients who have been newly married and have spent essentially their first year of marriage in isolation with each other, shall we say, and it has proven to be a wonderful experience for new couples, as well as, unfortunately, sometimes it's the other situations where families have come apart because it's sort of like we didn't realize how little we have in common. So it is really important for the parents to acknowledge their own challenges and to be able to get help or relationship help as so needed, because children who are spending more time at home with parents will not miss anything. So first thing in terms of taking care of your kids is to take care of yourselves. Do want to make a quick plug here. So to be careful not to overindulge in alcohol or drugs. Want to make sure to do indulge in exercise and self-care, meditation, mindfulness exercises, all can be found online in an effort to help take care of yourself, to put you in the best shape to helping your kids. The number one way, as I mentioned before, is if you notice a change in your child's behavior that, shall we say, is unexpected. So for those more experienced parents who have children of a variety of ages, they know at about 12 or 13, their child may become a little bit more restless, more argumentative, perhaps more irritable. But yet, at the same time, that irritable child will want to cuddle and lie down in laps and snuggle with mom and dad. But when it is a persistent change that can not necessarily be accounted for anymore by a change in the environment, so at that point is when you want to start thinking about maybe making your pediatrician aware, or perhaps to think about seeking some help. So we're looking about change that doesn't go back to normal. Now, I want to just say one more thing about this concept of going back to normal. Children live in the moment, okay? So those kids who were 11 years old last March, who are now 12, are different beings. And we have a tendency to forget, because humans are adaptable, is it's going to be an interesting time when the pandemic lifts and we get the all clear to redefine what normal is. And that will be an interesting challenge for all of us. But in terms of wanting to get together with friends and wanting to be able to do that, we have to encourage to do it, but do it safely, of course, from 6 feet apart, with our masks on, under those circumstances. If we could do football playoffs, since being a sports reporter, or the Miami Heat can play with empty stadiums, so can we, and we can be able to adjust.
Yeah, you just actually brought up a really good point about kids, growing up and changing. And we had a question come in through Instagram where they said, is it possible for my 4-year-old to have long-term anxiety about being around people she doesn't know? Because right now I'm making a big deal about not touching because of the pandemic. And that's interesting, because in those littler children that are just now starting to become cognitively aware, they might, are there long-term effects from the constant sanitizing and washing your hands? What's your thought on that?
So everything affects everything. So no matter what a parent does, it is, shall we say, being recorded in the memory banks of the children. So definitely sanitizing in good health. And it's always helpful to explain things about what you're doing. Mommy, why are you doing this? Daddy, why are you doing that? It's important to explain. At the same time, though, hug your kids. Show them that touch is not in and of itself bad. It's a question of staying healthy, not using bad or good or judgment words that can um, preclude establish healthy things. So hug, kiss, have a good time, roll around in the hay, roll around on the floor, roll around the backyard, go, jump into the pool together. A luxury that we have in Florida in January. So,
but you brought up a good point, and I hate to interrupt you, but you brought up a great point about the way parents frame it and the way parents label it, right? We're modeling that good behavior. Or not the good behavior, I should say, but we're modeling the mindset around the pandemic, and it's hard. It's hard for parents who are frustrated or out of work or, are having a hard time to then try to stay positive all the time too. So it's almost a two-pronged thing. We're talking about mental health in kids, but we also need parents to be mentally strong. Like you said as well, the first thing we need to do is take care of yourself. There's a couple good questions that came in. Denise mentions to turn off the TV. And that's an interesting point. We don't want to necessarily be watching COVID updates 24/7. But in your opinion, what is the effect of children watching what's not only happening with COVID, but what's happening with the world on TV? Do you recommend limiting screen exposure, news exposure?
It seems that negativity from the news, regardless, everybody's not liking everybody these days. And that's unfortunate for our society because we do want to build a society based on mutual respect and admiration. However, though, enough is enough in terms of exposing our kids to things that are upsetting. If it's upsetting to us as adults, it's upsetting to our children for two reasons. One is the facts are the facts. They're upsetting to see, as the questioner said, the hate that's seemingly everywhere. But it affects us as adults. So we get frustrated, and that frustration does go down to the children. So it's not only the children that need to be careful about what they watch, but enough is enough sometimes for the adults. True, we do live in a 24-hour news cycle. But, it's time to turn it off for a while, play some board games, or just have good conversations about stuff you think about and stuff you read.
Yeah, that's great advice. And, you were mentioning some of the tips of how to help your kids. And one of the things I was thinking while you were saying that was exercise. For me, I find that when I get the kids out on a bike ride, or we have a dance party, or even do an online workout class together, they're so much happier afterwards. So that's just a mom tip.
The evidence
that's not a Dr. Ruby medical approved tip. That's a Kristen tip right there. But exercise seems to help our moody kids.
Experienced mom,
I am experienced. I'm experienced. I haven't slept past 7 in 12 years. Dr. Ruby, we have another great question and from Larry. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but what are some of the ways we can start a conversation with kids? And that's a great question because let's say, we've done some of the things you've mentioned, mindfulness and gotten the TV off and really tried to connect with our kids and they're still kind of showing those behavioral issues. We're going to talk about when to call for a mental health professional, but how do you have that talk with kids, especially when you're in that tween teenage and they just don't want to talk to parents? How do you have conversation starters or icebreakers? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I think that would be super helpful for all of us to learn.
Okay, so I have a simple one, and that is never ask the question why, but do ask the question what. Why is usually met with a good pair of shoulder shrugs. because it's hard to explain why I do things or why I feel this way, or right. But if you can ask what or what's up or what's going on that's, that's making you upset right now, that's a much better question in terms of getting a conversation started. To be able to get an idea of what's something interesting that you've thought about today. Did you hear anything new in class? What's going on with a couple of friends? How are they handling the pandemic? And of course, there's going to be a wide range of responses. We know that some people are extremely careful. Some people are not careful at all. And again, trying to find that that middle ground to be able to find what works for any one particular family. So what is a great question? Avoid the whys and try to follow up on questions that get answered. In other words, don't just have the child answer for the purposes of answering, but follow up and ask a question based on what they put forward in terms of the what. And try to let the child lead the talking and to help them sort of to help them be able to complete thoughts.
Those are great tips. And, we only have a few more minutes left, but I actually have a question for you. So let's say your child is having behavioral issues. Maybe they've told you they want to hurt themselves. They want to physically harm themselves. They're feeling that bad. How do you respond to that in a compassionate and loving way when obviously a parent might be fearful of that? And then where do parents go for help if they need help?
Okay. So the first thing, especially in this day and age, because the good news in this pandemic is that parents are spending more time with their children, and that can only be good for not only in the present time, but in the future. What to do when you need help. So first of all, I would much rather people seek help and be told that things are okay, than to not seek help at all or wait, God forbid, for an emergency. Mental health is just like physical health. If you wait too long when you got a problem, it's going to get worse. Okay? That little twinge of chest pain that you may have, could be anxiety or it could be something else, especially if you have a family history of heart disease. So, be prudent, but yet take everything seriously. More often than not, was recently dealing with a situation where a particular individual adolescent who never ever asked for help. And for those of us in a certain age bracket who remember a commercial, when E.F. Hutton talks, we all listen. That if particular children who usually don't ask for help or are curious about it, please make sure that we listen and pay attention to it. We're all very busy, and sometimes we just got to put down what we're doing and pay attention. If you do need help, there are community resources. There is room at Joe DiMaggio for emergency health services if there is suicidal ideation or suicide attempts. At Joe DiMaggio, we have not had a season where we have not been busy over the course of the past 10 months. And that is true for mental health professionals. It is very hard to get and secure appointments with psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, mental health counselors and therapists, and of course, marriage and family therapists. But there are community resources. I do want to mention one in particular, and that's 211 Broward. They are a clearinghouse, and they have their finger on the pulse of any types of services you may need for a variety of different disorders. Of course, go to your primary care provider, your pediatrician, and ask them for help and support in terms of locating people that they've worked with. And of course, unfortunately, we have to also deal with our insurance companies and who you are eligible for care with. Sometimes it's best when you do go to the pediatrician is to perhaps do the research on your insurance company first to find out providers, so therefore you can provide your pediatrician with a list or a number of people that are eligible, that you are eligible to see on your insurance, and perhaps your pediatrician can either answer a question directly about a referral or at least figure out who to ask for it. We do try to make ourselves available for those kind of questions for the pediatricians who we say utilize our services. We've done that at the pediatric conference that I think is going to be held again this year in the fall. Trying to help service the pediatricians, and on our to-do list is to create a psychiatry telephone referral for pediatricians to at least ask questions, because sometimes pediatricians are on the forefront of dealing with kids and families with mental health.
I also want to point out that Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital does have a website and a blog, and I'll have someone put the links in the comments with lots of mental health resources on the blog as well. So make sure that you check out those resources. Dr. Ruby, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time today and your lunchtime. Thank Mrs. Ruby for letting us delay lunch a little bit today.
She's at work, but I will let her know that there was a shout out on Facebook.
All right.
Again, I just want to say one more thing, and that is it's okay to not be okay. And I think that sometimes we want to avoid the stigma of mental health and what it means for individual children and adolescents and families. Please do not become a victim to that stigma. It's okay to not be okay. Please get help if you need it. We will figure out ways to help get you to where you need to go. And I wish everybody good luck and good health. Get vaccinated. I'm sorry if that was political or medical advice.
No, that's medical advice. I mean, listen, that's medical advice.
All right, because that's the only way we're eventually going to help us all get back to, shall we say, the new world that we will have to rub our eyes and look at.
Well, we can't wait till we get there. But in the meantime, we're very grateful we have professionals like you to help us and our families. So thank you again for your time. Thank you to everyone for watching, all the wonderful questions that came in. You guys can feel free to leave in your questions, and I'll text Dr. Ruby and bother him as the day goes on and ask him to help us answer any more questions that you have.
Always a pleasure, Kristen, and to your entire team. And, and again, thanks to Joe DiMaggio for being here to help families.
Absolutely. And you guys, this is a new series we're doing on Facebook called Lunch and Learn. So if you have any other topic you'd like to hear about, please drop it in the comments. We'd love to bring you one of these every month so we can get your questions, I should say, answered. All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Ruby. Thanks to everybody else. Have a great day. Bye.
Sure. Bye.